Hi, everybody. Welcome. I'm Brett Danko, and this is...
I'm Rob Kron.
Woo-hoo-hoo! Welcome back to Old Guys in T-Shirts. This is part 3 of college planning. And this last installment's really going to focus on how the heck are we going to pay for this?
I think one of the conversations that is skipped in a lot of households, and we took too long to have this conversation in my household, is around money and how is college going to be paid for, and how much of that experience am I as a parent stepping up and saying we're going to cover, how much of it am I expecting you to cover. And again, your parenting styles are all different and you got to go with what works for you, but I'm of the belief that if that kid doesn't have some skin in the game, the experience is going to be different than if they do. And I'm actually a fan of them having some skin in that game, right? That this is something that I'm contributing to, so I'm going to take it a little more seriously maybe than if I don't. And whether that's just making them take out the guaranteed student loan that's around $5,500, or whether it's requiring some additional money that they've saved through working, or whether it's taking out a small loan that you co-sign with your child. Those are decisions you need to make within your own family dynamic. But having that conversation up front of this is what you should expect. We're going to pay $20, $30, $40, $50,000. And so if you pick to go to a school that's going to cost $70,000, that extra $20 is on you. It's amazing how different the conversation is with your child once you've kind of set those parameters than if you're operating under a vague kind of sense of, well, is mom and dad going to pay? I think they're going to pay for it all. Because then what happens is when you get to the punchline, right, where you've now applied to your 5 or 10 or however many schools you applied to, and you get those acceptance letters back with the package, if one of those is, yeah, I got accepted to Lehigh, which doesn't offer much, if any, merit aid, and it's $70,000 a year to go to that school, and you didn't kind of discuss with the child that I can only actually afford 40 of that, wow, I can't come up with 30. I don't want to take out that much debt. That's not a good conversation to have in the month of April when you're making decisions. That's a conversation you need to have, a couple years before you get to that point.
And that is, I think, the most important thing that we talk to clients about, et cetera, is what are your expectations? So some clients will say, I'm paying for everything, including graduate school, and I'll work for the rest of my life, or I'll never retire. I don't care. That's what I want. Then other folks are like, well, you're going to have to pay your way through. Or they'll say, we'll pay for everything to a state school. So everything that, whatever the state school is, roughly $30,000 a year, that's what we'll pay for. You want to do anything over that, then we'll go ahead and you're on your own. I think a lot of kids, though, in terms of talking to them about it, is they may actually say, in your Lehigh example, 30 grand a year. It's monopoly money. I'll take out loans and times 4, and that's 120, and then some interest, more money. Like what? They don't even understand. They don't understand that for the rest of their lives, they're going to be paying this thing off, and then they may need to go to graduate school, and then they'll be paying those loans off for the rest of their... They don't even realize this stuff. So I think having honest conversations about it really is important. About, look, what can we do as parents? And I've had parents say to me, does that make me a failure that I can't just pay $70,000 a year? And I'm like, are you crazy? Like, now if the kid is, stealing things, from everyone, then maybe there's something in your parenting style or whatever. They're doing bad stuff.
Brett, is there something you're disclosing here about your own parenting style?
That's well, my son, I will say this, when he was little, 2, 3, 4 years old, we called him Sticky Nicky because Nick would come home. We'd be driving home from daycare and he'd be dangling keys. and it was the teacher's keys. So he wasn't like driving the car. He'd just be like, "Hey, I found these." I'm like, "Where'd you find them?" In her purse. So anyway, so we'd call them sticky nicks. He'd come home with different stuff, and we'd have to make the trek back, saying, "Sorry," but he was young then.
Yeah, okay.
So not anymore. Not
Fair
anymore.
enough.
You can trust him, all right? But seriously though, so it's one of those things about that doesn't make you successful or not successful or whatever. All it makes it is that, okay, I don't have $70,000, which the vast majority of people don't. So one of the things to just keep in mind here is having that conversation and not making it out to be like, oh, I did something wrong. Now, I'll be honest with you. I've had this conversation with groups of teenagers, and teenagers feel at least that parents should be paying for kind of where they want to go to school. And this means that we as parents haven't really talked to them about the expense. Because for them to just say, oh, I think you should pay for college. Well, then when you talk about $70,000 and then you're explaining to them and they're like, oh my God, that's a lot of money. Then they have some context to it. But just if you haven't had these conversations, they're like, well, why won't you? Why do I have to take out loans? Why didn't you save more? Well, if you're talking about it early on and you say, look, this is what we can do, and you're going to have to find merit aid, etc., that allows them to go in with a more open-eyed.
You said something really interesting about also making sure they connect with the size of whatever dollar amount you're talking about.
Which is tough.
That's $30,000 and whatever. So with one of my children, I put it in terms of how many automobiles they could buy, right? Because you're at a time when they get their driver's license and they're at some point aspiring to have a new car, or what type of car they really gravitate towards. That's not all kids, but for one of my children, that was an obsession. And so we just kind of looked at, all right, well, if we look at 4 years at $70,000, compare that to 4 years at $30,000, there's a big delta. And do you know how many Ford Mustangs you could buy?
I love that. Yeah.
Right? With that difference. And that was a crystallizing moment, right? Like, wow, that's a lot of Ford Mustangs. So I think that what we're saying here is setting expectations early is important. Having an honest conversation about money and what role you're willing to play in paying for college earlier in the process rather than later just makes everything go a lot smoother.
What I want to talk about is how do we pay for it. So we have 529. We can have needs-based, and then we can have merit-based. We can actually go ahead and use earnings that we've, taxable monies that we've had. We already talked about 529s. Those are college savings plans that you can put money in, and as you put money in, it grows over time. As it grows, tax deferred. When you take it out for qualified education expenses, it is tax free coming out. So that's great. That's awesome. There's types of credits, such as the lifetime learning credit, the American Opportunity Credit. So there's these different credits out there that are available. Do you want to talk about just quickly the FAFSA and needs-based?
Yeah.
Because a lot of schools may not give merit aid or give very little of it, but almost all the schools are doing need-based aid. So go ahead.
Yeah, so I think it's interesting when you're looking at, so how much do I need to save, or how much is college going to cost me? There's a little bit of a used car purchase going on here, right? The actual sticker price is not necessarily what you're going to pay, and so it's really hard to know that, all right, if I'm looking at school X, that's going to cost $60,000, and if I'm looking at school Z, that's going to cost $20,000. Like, you really aren't going to know that until you've been accepted and you get that financial aid letter. And as you mentioned, in that financial aid letter, there's two sections to that. There's a needs-based section, and then there's, in some places, a merit-based section. And that need-based section is really driven by something called the FAFSA, which is a process for the federal government essentially determining how much money as a family you should be able to pay towards a college education. Ultimately, they arrive at something called your expected family contribution. And so that amount is then used by a lot of schools to calculate how much need you're going to get. So as a quick example, right, if you're going to a school that's going to cost $50,000 a year, and the financial aid process through the FAFSA calculates that your expected family contribution is $25,000 a year, then generally speaking, at a lot of schools, you'll probably see a financial aid award in the need category around $25,000, right? They'll meet the difference between their cost of attendance and what your expected family contribution will be. Now, how they meet that, can be a mix of that guaranteed loan I talked about can be a part of that, work study can be a part of that, and then grants can be a part of that. The other side of that equation, though, are merit-based awards, and those don't have anything to do with your demonstrated financial need. They're based upon your academic achievements and honestly, just how bad does the school want you. And different schools have different philosophies around merit aid. I mentioned that there are some schools that just offer very little in the merit category, and there are others that offer a lot. And so that's part of your search process is if you're not going to qualify for a lot of need-based aid, but that price tag is still unreasonable, you're going to want to be looking at schools that are known for giving merit aid. And then going back to what we talked about at the beginning of have you given your child the best opportunity by working on that GPA and maybe those test scores and the extracurriculars and the demonstrated interest.
So I actually want to go back and talking about the FAFSA. So how do they determine, do they calculate your income, assets? Is it just like a black box where we have no idea how it, or is there a science to it?
So there is a degree of science to it, and we could spend hours on dissecting all of the science. But I think that the two fundamental elements that people need to get their arms around is that they're going to look at what assets do you have available to pay for college, and how much income do you have.
Okay.
Right? Those are fundamentally the two things they're going to look at, and income, they feel more of that should be dedicated to college than your assets. So a couple other things I'll walk through. When you look at your assets, they're not going to be looking at your house. They're not going to be looking at your retirement assets. They're basically looking at those things that are in taxable accounts that you could sell and then...
So my 401k,
doesn't
not
count.
going to look at it. My IRA,
not going to look at
it. Okay. My home equity for the FAFSA, not going to look at it. And we're going to talk about something in a second.
Yep.
Once it goes down to the school level, there may be some questions they ask.
We'll get to that.
But for the FAFSA level, so they're not going to look at that stuff. It's just money that you have in taxable accounts.
Right.
Okay.
So your bank account, your savings account, and any investment account that, again, isn't a tax-deferred, retirement-focused vehicle.
But the kids' assets are... So it's the parents' assets...
Excellent
and then
point.
they also look at the kids' assets, and they want a lot more of the kids'
They
assets.
absolutely do. So again, if we're going to look at those rankings, they're actually going to look at your income as the largest percentage that is going to need to be dedicated towards paying for college. Assets that the child has are next in that pecking order, and then at the bottom of the list, at around 5%, are assets that are in your name that, again, are not in a retirement account or in your home.
And 529s and Coverdales count as parents' assets.
Correct. So they're part of that 5% equation.
Yep.
The income piece, that's the big deal, right? So when you're looking at this, the other thing that people often forget about is that when a school is looking at your income and the FAFSA is looking at your income, they're actually looking at income from essentially 2 years ago, because they're basically looking from a tax return that you filed for money that was earned, right? So it was a tax return filed earlier in the year, which was actually for money you made, the prior year. So one thing that people will often get trapped in is they'll be in a situation where they had a job change or a change to their income level, and it's not necessarily syncing up with their ability to actually pay, because you may have made a ton of money 2 years ago that the FAFSA is then telling a college, well, look, they're making a lot of money, they should be able to pay for all of that school, but your situation changed within the last year, and the FAFSA isn't going to capture that.
So what do you do?
Yeah, well, so you brought up this other thing that some schools will look at it at a specific level, and it's called the CSS profile, which is a more...
Are you just making that up? Or
No, that's actually a real acronym.
All right, that's fine.
Yeah,
I think he's making it up.
Okay.
No, it's not. He's not. Okay.
So this is a more detailed form, so you're providing a lot more information. And as you alluded to, they're going to look a lot at home equity. Yep. They're going to look at a wider swath of your financial capabilities. But they also have sections for you to explain, unique circumstance. I just lost my job, or I just took another job where I had to take a huge pay cut, or the way bonuses were structured, I'm not going to see that income for a while. Anyway, it gives you the ability to tell your story, if there is a story to be told, that just the straight FAFSA might not capture.
Yep. That's really helpful. I'm actually going to add something with the 529. So 529s, if it's from the parents, that's counted as a parental asset. That's that roughly 5% or so. However, if the grandparents have a 529 and the grandparents pay, and we're going to say your freshman tuition with that, schools will ask the next year, okay, so how did you pay for your tuition? Well, grandma and grandpa had a 529. Believe it or not, then they count it as the child's income. And then they say, and let's just say grandma and grandpa's 529 is now gone. And then they say, oh, guess what? We're going to cut your financial aid because we view that as the child's income.
Yep.
So you actually have to put more money up or take out more loans, etc. So anytime you have grandparents involved, if it isn't going to be outright given to the parents to then dole it out, if it's the grandparents, try to wait until junior, senior year. That's what you're looking at, ideally senior year, to have them pay for that out of the grandparents' 529, so that then you won't have to deal with that we're going to count it as a kid's asset, so we're going to lower the amount of aid we're going to give.
So let's just summarize that option. So grandparent has a 529 set up. Option 1, they transfer that money to the parent. So it becomes a parent asset and is always a parent asset regardless of when it's used.
Yep.
Or they're not comfortable with that option. They want to keep it themselves. Best for them to wait to use that money to pay for education until senior year.
Yes, or the third option is person who I know, both parents on both sets of grandparents were very wealthy. So child is born, $150,000. That's $15,000 times 5 years, $75,000 for grandma, $75,000 from grandpa. So one set of grandparents did $150,000. This is within 2 weeks of birth. Wow. $150,000 into a 401.
Are they adopting?
Well, that's just a 529. And then the other set of grandparents did the same thing. The child was 2 to 3 weeks old and had $300,000. Rob, guess what? It doesn't matter when you use it. Okay, so the grandparents can go ahead and keep that in the grandparents, and you'll just spend that, and you'll be fine. So that is the third option. That's called the Lucky Sperm and Egg Club. Okay, that's that your parents or grandparents are loaded and will just pay for everything.
Yeah.
So anyway, that's just something to think about here.
All right.
And on that note, I'm going to move on to the next topic. Never be afraid to ask.
And ask what?
Ask for money.
Right. It's a negotiation, right?
All they can say is no. That's it. And remember, the financial aid folks, they ain't hanging with the academic folks. So it ain't like, you're asking for money, mom and dad, or I'm asking for money, and they're going to tell my psych professor, and my psych professor is going to give me a C because of it. No. So the stories, like tons of stories, I'll just use one of them. Somebody got into their number one school and their number two school and their number one school. They were roughly both $60,000, about 5-6 years ago, $60,000 for each of them. But one of them, their second choice, gave them $30,000 of grants.
Of merit aid.
I'm sorry, merit aid. I'm sorry, not
Okay.
grants. So merit aid.
Okay.
But they didn't have to pay it back. So I
Right.
messing. So meaning they didn't have to pay it. So it
Right.
was merit aid, but it's a grant. So they didn't have to pay it back. So really, it was going to cost them half as much to go to their number two school as their number one school. All right. So the person called me, was one of my students, and said, "Hey, like, what do you think of this?" I go, "What do you think of it? Send that letter to the number one school. What if they say no?" I said, "Well, then they'll say no, and then you can make a decision." They matched it.
Yep, and that's not uncommon, right? One of the things that I think everyone should understand is higher education is a business, right? And so they are attempting to, fill their institution with students who are a good fit for what they're trying to accomplish, whether that's diversity or a certain academic level or certain subject matter interest. Again, there's a whole range of different possibilities, but they're trying to go attract the students that are going to help create the institution they want, and their business, so they need to get a certain number of them as well. And one of the ways they do that is through financial incentives. So you should never be afraid to, when you're comparing one school to another, where you've gotten those two award letters, to go back to one of them and say, look, in order for us to go here, here's what we need. And as Brett said, you're going to find that you're not talking to the future psych professor or future English lit professor. You're talking to a financial aid person who has these conversations all the time.
Yes.
And so, again, the worst outcome is they're going to tell you no, and you're in the exact same place you were before you even had the conversation.
And we had a client who, they said, "Well, what do I do? I have, I want them to match I want the number one school to match it." And I said, "Well, just go ahead and send the letter in." And they said, the number one school said no. So what we did was we said, all right, so the difference was in this other case that I'm talking about was $20,000 a year. So then all I did was I just said, all right, so $80,000, here's approximately paying it back over 10 years. I said to the child, all right, here's what you would have to pay every month. And they're like, "You know what? It was my number one school, but my number two school is pretty darn close to my number one school. I don't feel like paying all that back." So what's that? Three Mustangs?
That's a lot of Mustangs.
3 or 4 Mustangs. Depending on how you get it souped up or not. But 3 to 4 Mustangs.
Good point.
I got to tell you, they were like, "You know what? I'm going to go to my number two school." I had an amazing experience. I have to tell you, kids will bloom where they're planted. I am convinced of that. And so it may not be your number one school. You may have your hopes set on that. And then you don't get into that school and you're like, "Oh, I'm a failure. I'm this." What are you talking about? There's so many great schools out there. And I would argue you could go to, I'll just throw this out, Harvard, and kind of not take advantage of everything that Harvard has to offer. And you could go to another school that isn't ranked as high, but you really take advantage of all the opportunities there. And you'll have a better experience. And more importantly, you'll emerge a better person for it and a more complete person. So I would urge you to when you're talking about with your kids is, yes, they can have schools that are their favorites, but really just looking at it as saying, hey, cast a wide net, especially early on, and then slowly come down for them. And that's why it's so important what Rob was talking about having good grades, about having good extracurriculars. If you choose if you did well in tests, you choose to use tests, having that, showing interest in the school, because that allows you to have a wider net.
More options.
And that's what you're trying to do. And then you can go from there. And then suddenly you have 3 schools that you're kind of playing off of one another, trying to figure out, instead of just one school and you have nothing else to compare it to, and it's one price and that's it. Yeah. So I think that's really, really important, is that they will bloom where they're planted. And I use the example with our daughter. She was like, "Well, what if I don't get into my number one school?" Well, she doesn't have one. So I was like, "You don't even have one, like that you really want." She goes, "Well, but," and I said, "Look, here was my thing. I wanted to go to Princeton. That's where I wanted to go." Princeton said, no. Was it in risky business? I'm dating myself, but I don't care. With Tom Cruise, Princeton can use a man like Joel. Well, let me be clear. Princeton did not want to use a man like Brett. So anyway, so Princeton said, get the hell out of here. I'm sure they said it in a very nice way, but they said, we don't want you.
Do you have that letter?
I do not have that letter, but I'm actually, it may be somewhere. But anyway, but I do have, I do have an acceptance from the University of Pennsylvania. So I went to the University of Pennsylvania, and on the very first day, September 1st, 1986, I met a woman who lived right next to me named Dawn D'Orlando.
I've heard of her.
Yes, that is my wife. So here's what's amazing. I say to our daughter, Abby, had I gotten into my first choice, Princeton, you would not be alive. And she's like, I get it. That's really deep. How did you deal with it? Because you've gone through it a couple times. So how have you dealt with it with, well, this is a school I want to go to. And also it changes what? Daily? Weekly? It's like, this is the greatest. No, this is the greatest.
So a lot of learning experiences through all of this. The first is that I have 3 boys. All of them are different. They each have approached this process differently, had different opinions. So my oldest really didn't have strong conviction about any of those things that we talked about earlier. Yeah. Big school, small school, rural, like it was really hard to get him to say, these are the types of things that I favor over others, because to your point, I think he fully embraced he would bloom wherever he was planted. Yeah. That's just how he's wired and his outlook on life. So a lot of it was when we went to the schools, during his sophomore and junior years, which ones did he just feel welcomed and important and special, and that he could thrive there? And there was a pretty big list. And then it came down to, all right, well, which one was going to be most cost effective? Because again, there wasn't I'm so overly passionate about this one that's I need to go there. So that was his experience. My middle son's experience was the one of, I really want to go to a very expensive school that doesn't give a lot of merit aid. I got into a school I liked that did give a lot of merit aid. And, ultimately the Mustang argument was the winner there. And then, I've got my youngest who's starting his senior year now, and we've kind of just completed a whirlwind tour of schools that are focused in on the things he wants to do. He's a very analytical person, so I'm sure there's going to be a lot of lists and comparisons and the whole process that we'll go through as we approach application time.
We've spent a lot of time, an hour or whatever we did here.
We can talk, can't we, Brett?
Yeah, well, yes, well, I can, unfortunately, but and
I can too. But I have skills. But
you have wisdom. I just talk. You have wisdom. But seriously, though, I think one of the things is, yes, this was long, but I didn't want to do a 3-minute, all right, this is this. And Rob said, well, I don't want to just do 5 minutes and we're all done. We really want to have a thorough discussion about this and cover a topic in a big way. So hopefully you found this helpful. And thanks for listening in. If you listened to all of it, thank you a lot. Thank you very much. If you listen for 2 minutes, then I'm not going to thank them.
No, it's not
1 minute or 2 minutes. I mean, you got to be invested in it.
But before we wrap this up, though, Brett, I did have to ask you: was your Milli Vanilli T-shirt dirty, and that's why you went with Mickey Mouse?
Well, my Milli Vanilli, but that would be if I was lip syncing. Yeah. So anyway, no, this is my voice. No, I decided to wear my Mickey Mouse shirt today. As you see, Rob is wearing his Rolling Stones shirt. That is, for the younger generation, they may just think it's just a
lips
tongue and
tongue,
lips.
yeah.
But that is his Rolling Stone shirt. So one of the things is when we were talking about doing different topics and actually just doing this type of video, everybody's always seeming so stuffy. They have jackets on, or they have ties, or even I guess the suit now is no tie, but a collared shirt with the jacket. That's the look now. If you go to conferences, that's what you'll see, and that's a great look. People who have seen me teach and do any of my seminars, for the most part, I like to be very comfortable. And our thing is how do we demystify things in terms of talking about them, the information, but then how do we also just act comfortably and do it in a way that we're not putting the audiences to say, oh, well, we're in our jackets and our fancy suits. No, we're just in T-shirts. We're old guys in T-shirts. That's what we are. So anyway, I know we covered a lot of things, so thank you. Thank you for hanging in there with us, and best of luck with your college search. You can always contact Rob and I if you ever have any questions. We're easy to find on the internet. You can just Google us, right? And you'd be able to find us.
Or we'll provide some information here in this video on how you can contact us.
Yeah, that's it. Yeah, provide the information.
It's technology.
Technology. Thank you, everyone. So, and we're happy. One of the other things that, because I want to touch on this, first school. This is the school I really want to go to. This is the school I really want to go to, or this is not a school I want to go to. I have to tell you, a long time ago, or as some parents, well, I did college pro painting over the summer, paid for the whole year. You see, that doesn't exist anymore.